Alright, so now I'm going to set up the bag. I just have a regular trash bag here. I already put in the vacuum and one of the inlet ports. All this is fuel tubing from Hobby Shop. Just take a little bit of foam tape, cut off maybe an inch, inch and a half, just enough to wrap around it about 1.5 times. And then you wrap it around the tip of the tubing and then insert it from the inside. And then just pull it over the top, pull it nice and tight, take a zip tie, and clamp that down nice and tight and trim off the excess. Now we have the vacuum and the 2 inlet ports, and we're ready to put in the molds with the cloth. And you notice I have this on a piece of white cloth, which is an old t-shirt. What I've found is that if you lay this directly on plywood, the molds can sometimes poke little holes into the bag, and you have tons of leaks and you can't figure out where they're coming from. So now you just connect the vacuum to your T, and then the inlet ports are just going to go on the middle of the mold. And my flow media, which helps the resin go out a little bit faster, is pretty high tech. It's just an old piece of screen. So I place that on top of the peel ply. Like I say, I like to keep this very low tech. Make sure everything lines up, which it does. Everything's covered up. Now this is just a snap seal. You can get them online. I think I bought this one from Aerospace Composite Products 15 years ago, and it's still working today. You just bunch up the end of the bag, start snapping it closed. Now here comes the beauty of resin infusion. If you put all this together and you don't like what you see, you haven't mixed up any resin, so you can undo it and redo it. Now you got 2 clamps for your inlets. Clamp those off. This stuff got moved around a little bit, but that's why I like to tack everything down. Now I'm going to turn on the vacuum and try and hold the inlets where they should go. And we'll let it pull down on the vacuum and make sure everything's where it needs to be. Like I say, the beauty of resin infusion is now you just make sure everything's in the right spot. I see a few places where it's bridged. So you can turn off your vacuum, let a little bit of air in, just until the plastic and cloth can shift around. And then you clamp it back on. And now you can push the cloth into the corners where it needs to go. One of the spots, I got my little trim here. It doesn't want to go in there. So I'm going to push it in. There you go. There, now it's in all the little nooks and crannies, and we're ready to infuse it. Now to infuse it, I'll just mix up a batch of the thin epoxy. You always want to mix up a little bit extra because you wouldn't want to come short. This is just the Maz, it's called Infures or whatever. Now that's the resin. Here is essentially the thinner. And then this is the hardener. Now you want to keep mixing the epoxy. I don't know if you can see it right now, it's a little bit milky. They recommend 2 to 3 minutes of mixing, and when you're done it should be a nice clear liquid. Alright, so now I've mixed the epoxy for about 3 minutes. You can see it's a nice clear liquid. Now's where the magic begins. Everything looks good, so you set the pot in the middle, stick the end of your tube in there, unclamp it, and then when you let it go, you can see the epoxy shoots down in there and starts to infuse out, and on its way out it pushes out any air bubbles. I'll get the other side going. Now you just kind of rig it up because it's going to take a little while, so you just want to let it do its own thing. Now it's just a matter of time. This is the outer piece here, the fairing. So as soon as it gets to the tip of the tail and covers the fairing, you can clamp this off and then just let it cure. I just turn the vacuum up a little bit. You can turn it down later once it starts to gel, but at first you want max vacuum just to pull it through as quick as possible. Now I think I've actually developed a little bit of a leak. I don't know if you can see it. There's actually air bubbles traveling out from the middle. That happens sometimes, and the way to fix that is you always keep a tube of cheap latex caulk around, and it's good for sealing leaks. And you don't know where the leak is, so you just gob this all over, and it's thick enough that once it gets pulled into the leak it'll stop it, but it won't get pulled into the part. And you just push it around until that bubbling stops, and you know you've sealed the leak. Still slightly bubbling. And you can see some of the resin here will actually get pulled up into your vacuum hose, and that's why I'll show you later. I have a resin trap on my vacuum. It's just a extra chamber that collects any resin that gets sucked down the hose so it doesn't go into your pump. Alright, now all the bubbles have stopped, so the leak is sealed. So this side's almost done. Looks like it's already to the end of the tail here, so this side of this tail is already done. Just got a little air bubble that needs to be cleaned out. You can see here it actually went around it and left some air, but it'll suck that out, and it'll still be a good part. And here it's starting to get into that little fairing. On this one it's already into the fairing. Well, sorry about cutting that off, the battery ran out. Everything's infused. Now what I do is I put it out in the garage where it's currently 88 degrees out, so it kicks off the epoxy a little bit faster. I got my vacuum box here with my pump, and then the tail, it's all ready to go. The whole thing's coated with resin. The inlet tubes are clamped off, and now you just leave it for the night, let it harden up, and tomorrow morning we'll pull it apart and see what it looks like.